Gokhan Saki. Are you guys familiar? Gokhan Saki is a stud to start with, but extremely fun on paper. This guy was a kickboxer. He had like 98 kickboxing fights. I think some of them were boxing slipped in, but this is a stand-up fighter, okay? And I'm quite sure even a champion. In kickboxing, you can win a world championship, win the K1, you win glory. I mean, see, these are some of the bigger titles for me. And I don't fully know what Gokhan Saki did. I just know this guy was awesome, particularly in the world of stand-up. And when he came over to MMA, it didn't work. Not only did it not work, he was losing fights in the striking realm. He was getting knocked out. And it just becomes a question of how. How does a guy who is such a better striker come out and get knocked out in MMA? And guys, there's an answer. A lot of it comes right back, is simply down to the 4-ounce gloves. I mean, in many ways, the reason you saw BJ Penn get cleaned up in that video outside of a club, it didn't just have to do with the alcohol, it also had to do with the gloves. Now, I'm going to get off that example, because that's ugly, right? That's an ugly example. But it's fair to bring in, look, if you change one rule, you have now changed the sport. Football and soccer are very close to the same sport, but one, you control the ball with your hand, and one, you control it with your feet. So it's a totally different sport. I mean, do you see the difference? You change one thing, you've now changed the sport, and those gloves do matter. The defenses that you would use in pure kickboxing with 16-ounce gloves on, they do a lot of what they call the shield, which is where you take those gloves where your hands are this far apart, but they look like they're touching because the glove is touching, and you just bring it up. You put your head down and you bring the gloves like this, and everything the guy does will bounce off of your hands. It's called the shield. You cannot shield in MMA. In the world of kickboxing, they're not real big into head movement. They're just not. They just go to the shield. In Western boxing, you're doing a pull, you're doing a slip, you're doing a weave, which is closer to what you need to do in MMA to get close. None of those is still the answer. I'm just sharing with you why there's a little bit of a difference. And I got this, okay, Gokhan Saki, but I got this directly talking to two great kickboxers, Ray Sefo and Tyrone Spong. And I asked them both because they came over and did MMA. They both won. But they had a harder time than you would think, and the fights largely stayed on the feet where these guys lived. I said, by the way, you got to tell, what was that like? I thought if this guy stayed on his feet with you for 2 seconds, he'd be knocked out. They both told me the same thing, which is simply the threat of the takedown. Because this is a new sport, because there is a new weapon, because it's not the one that we're used to, the threat of the takedown. And I want to bring that term to you guys, because neither Ray Sefo or Tyrone Spong was taken down, by the way. But there was a threat. They were worried. They were wondering what will happen. And I will talk to you guys about that a lot when two guys go out to fight. They don't have to get the takedown, but they have to have the threat of the takedown. Michael Chandler, just because he was a couple-time All-American wrestler, on paper was able to change elevation, get Hooker to bring his hands down, the threat of the takedown. The threat of the takedown is what ended that fight. It was the beginning of the end, the threat. Michael Chandler, the great decorated two-time All-American wrestler from Missouri, never got a takedown. He never even got a hold of him, but he had the threat. And as many of us come and we complain about the style of Justin Gaethje, we're complaining that he doesn't threaten the takedown. Not that the former All-American from Northern Colorado doesn't go get the takedown. We offer that he should be threatening the takedown. Dan Henderson is another fine one to bring. Dan Henderson was one of the few wrestlers who went out and became a striker. We've seen it the other way, but Henderson was one of the few wrestlers. After he did it, you saw Woodley start to land some right hands. Just before Woodley, you saw Josh Koscheck, but I'm about out of them. I'm about out of wrestlers that had knockout power, but all three of those guys, Woodley, Henderson, Koscheck, threatened a takedown. They would come out, they would change elevation, come back up when your hands were down and catch you over the top. I bring that to you as my analysis because the threat of the takedown is so important. And when I do bring that to you as an analysis, I want you to understand what I'm talking about. I have not talked to Gokhan Saki, but I imagine he would say what Ray Sefo, I imagine what he'd say what Tyrone Spong said, which, is a little bit different. I couldn't quite let my hands and feet go because I didn't know if the guy was going to come under, I'd be extended. It took me a minute to get comfortable out there. And then you'll run into a guy like Israel Adesanya that's got the same skill set, but for some reason just didn't fear that. He just didn't fear the threat. And it could have been for different reasons. He understood range different. He was more confident there. He said to hell with it and didn't care. I mean, sometimes it's a very unsophisticated answer. But it doesn't change the answer. The difference in MMA, and the reason why even the skilled strikers will have a hard time in the striking realm of MMA, is not the takedown. It's the threat that there could be a takedown.